Friends, on October 14th, a Russian submarine surfaced near France. It was escorted by Nato ships not far from the coast of Brittany, which borders the English Channel. It was in a surfaced position. We are monitoring the situation, NATO reported. NATO is ready to defend our alliance, demonstrating constant vigilance. The submarine in question is the Novorossiysk. A British publication confirmed that it is the Novorossiysk. Back in September, the VCHK-OGPU channel, citing a source, reported that some sort of maneuvers had occurred on this submarine. And now it has turned up off the coast of France. Roman Grigorievich, what is happening? Drones over European territory. Russia's little green men have appeared near the border with Estonia. All the Estonian media have written about it. And now submarines off the coast of France? What is this?
Well, let's put it in military terms. It's just posturing. Russian posturing, nothing more. What are these little green men at one of the Estonian border crossings? I mean, how many showed up? It wasn't even a squad, not even a sabotage and reconnaissance group. They came out just for a photo op, as they say, just to be seen. No, and then it was launched as a pes psyop. For the entire weekend, everyone was chewing over this news. Little green men aren't going to come through a checkpoint. The fact is, if you're looking for Russia's little green men, they're already in Estonia. They are inside Estonia. Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia have been infiltrated inside these three states. Infiltrated over, nearly 100 years of the Soviet yoke. So this infiltration has already happened, and they need to be rooted out from within. The fact that they showed up there for a photo op, well, it's a SEOP. They earned their pay, so to speak, their SEOP pay. As for the drones, at first the drones were just, taking a look, so to speak, the same 24 drones that entered Poland, and that can be considered a provocation. But after that, there were combat sorties with drones. And this is where the Europeans have a problem with drones, because every flight of such a drone is a combat drone that was at a minimum gathering intelligence, digital terrain maps, targets, and so on and so forth, in order to then upload it into the memory of those same missiles or those same strike drones that will go on to carry out a combat mission. These were genuinely the military execution of military tasks. They should have been shot down. But as for the Russian subsurfacing, well, what's new about that? It's not sinking, is it? The Russian kind doesn't sink. Naturally, it surfaced even more so, becoming increasingly apparent and prominent. Yes, this is indeed a powerful diesel generator, which at one point in time was still quite operational and functional. Okay, I now fully understand the intricate details and operational aspects of nuclear submarines, a complex and fascinating subject. Remember, Kursk sank. Well, that boat was still more or less nuclear powered, but this one doesn't sink. Naturally, as soon as some problem arises, it surfaces around him. Then everyone runs around like a fool with a mortar and pestle, trying to do something with it now, either her or escort or tow, but not in territorial waters, at least not in waters under NATO responsibility. Naturally, NATO reacted to these. For example, they tracked it, and the French are piloting Russian submarines. They have a pretty serious warning system at sea and in the ocean, including, that is me, the Americans. They also have some of these networks, which are practically hydrolocation networks, echolocation networks, various types of location points that track the movement of these submarines. Therefore, the Russian thing that surfaced, well, it will be recaptured somewhere. I think they will take them away. This submarine will be towed away, and then they will try to finish it somehow. But she's as much a submarine as I am a pope, basically. Novel.
Gorovich, so already. Trump has officially announced that the United States may transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine if the war cannot be resolved soon. But we understand perfectly well that it won't work. Moreover, the Ukrainian delegation, headed by Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko and the Secretary of the National Bank of Ukraine, RNBU Umarov, headed to Washington. And the purpose of the trip is to increase the air defense system. I understand it's a purchase. They are trying, among other things, to discuss the sale of Atacama, Jazz, and Tomahawk missiles by America. President Zelensky said this literally the day before. Let's discuss.
Let's not get enchanted now so as not to be disappointed later. Why? I'll explain it using my fingers. In September, about the Chilean flamingos, about the missiles that our Firepoint is trying to make 100 pieces per day. I'm exaggerating on purpose now because everyone is fed up with the announcements. We've already talked about this once. Our announcers, the great greens, who announced something around the corners, but there are no missiles. Firepoint turned out to be a fiery show-off by and large. That's all. No flamingos, no. They say that when asked where the flamingos went, they say that they flew away to warmer climes. Well, that's roughly what it looks like. So we spent the whole of September flaming. Now, so that it doesn't turn out that we'll be using anti-aircraft missiles all October, but there won't be any missiles. So now understanding such processes more. All these show-off announcements, some videos, some meetings somewhere, there are no rockets. Here's a military analyst when they ask a question. Let's talk about something that someone said somewhere, but it's called one old woman. Well, not one, but two grannies, she said. That is, on that side there is one granny, and on our side there is one granny. Here are two old ladies sitting somewhere on a bench talking. There are no missiles. The point is that if at least one Tomahawk enters and completes at least one combat mission, what is a Tomahawk? This is a half-ton warhead thrown 1,500 kilometers. Believe me, we will start discussing this with you right away. How, by what mechanism, where did they throw it, and so on and so forth. This doesn't exist yet. The same picture for flamingo. Well, where are these flamingos? Well, there. We really did fly off the warmer climes with Mindic. He was the first to follow Starshov there, and then all the flamingos followed him there along with Klin. Well, that's roughly how it looks at the moment. What can we really talk about, really? Well, really, we have state-owned enterprises operating here. They work great. Who will say anything bad about Neptunes? KB, Luch, Content. The design bureau, the state design bureau, Luke, which has been making these Neptunes for more than 10 years, and they have taken flight and are being modernized, performing combat missions. But this is our AGK. This is a state-owned Ukrainian enterprise, which naturally remains. That is, this is the base of the state. This is called forever. We have these technologies. The second, An-196, is fierce. This is a smart, operational, and even strategic drone for some reasons. And the indicator is that the drone, which the State Bureau, or rather the State Enterprise Antonov produces, the An-196, carries out combat missions. He will forever remain Ukrainian. And what is Flamingo? Or what are, let's say, these ballistic missiles, which, again, this Firepoint has been showing off about these ballistics for the second year. No one has ever seen these ballistics with their own eyes. This is a private enterprise. Private, behind which the ears of the Israelis stick out, who in the end will sell all of this in Israel. We are now going to invest millions in this enterprise. We are going to invest in the development of technologies, and then they turn out to be Israeli. And we will see a fig with a poppy seed from the other side. We still don't see this production. The money was invested neither in flamingos nor in ballistic missiles. No. Naturally, and in the future, that is strategically, it is wrong, but this rely. They need to be kicked out. In this sense, private individuals with strategic objectives. All of this should be state-owned. That is, at a minimum, strategic missiles should be developed on the basis of state-owned enterprises. And the winged levels of flamingos and, let's say, the ballistic levels of the same Thunder, what do private owners have to do with it? Well, now they'll shake their asses and then chase the flamens to warmer climes. What will you do with them? And we will also be left without panties. And then you'll have to decide whether to fish or cut bait because, well, it's just not proper, to say the least.
Roman Igorevich, Russia has modified its systems for launching ballistic missiles. The effectiveness of the Patriot has dropped to from 42% to 6%, according to General Romanenko. Everyone has shared this information. Specifically, Lieutenant General, former Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Igor Romanenko, made the following statement. Russia has made a modification related to adjusting the software of its ballistic missiles, and now, on the final leg of their route, these missiles perform maneuvers that make them harder to destroy. Roman Igorevich, in your opinion, how accurate is this information, given that everyone has shared it? And if so, what are the consequences, and what should be done?
Well, that's slightly incorrect. It's not the final leg of the route. This isn't a cruise missile after all. It's a ballistic one. The correct term would be the terminal phase of the ballistic trajectory. That is, on the terminal phase of the ballistics, Russia's current Iskanders, Kinzhals, and Kh-22s, most likely in the near future as well, will be able to yaw. It's called yawing along the trajectory. That is, changing their flight trajectory, approaching the target from a slightly different angle. And this throws off the settings for intercepting at the meeting point, to put it correctly, for an anti-missile like the Patriot. The thing is, a Patriot anti-missile doesn't chase the Russian missile, the Iskander, the ballistic missile. It goes to a meeting point that is calculated by a computer that tracks the missile's ballistics itself. That is the ballistic trajectory of the Russian missile. and it sends the anti-missile to that meeting point. So by changing the parameters of the ballistic trajectory, especially on the terminal phase, literally as it's approaching the target, the Russian missiles evade this meeting point. Naturally, the anti-missile simply misses. Why? Because, well, the PAC-3, which is the Patriot's anti-missile, its method for destroying Russian ballistics is what's called hit to kill, meaning the missile practically hits the Russian missile. Now imagine this, the Russian missile is traveling at a speed of Mach 3 or 4, and the Patriot missile is traveling at roughly the same speed. So at closing speeds of 6 to 6, 7, 8 Mach, the two missiles have to meet. Can you imagine the precision required for that? And we're talking fractions of a second, literally fractions of a second. If the calculation isn't right, the missile will naturally miss, meaning no contact actually occurs. And you either have to launch a second missile, but there's no time because it's on its terminal phase, practically right before the target. Therefore, it's most likely that a new algorithm for calculating the ballistic trajectory will now be developed. This isn't inside information, but it's what should happen. And most likely our engineers and the Americans will now develop a new algorithm after it's approved. They'll launch the anti-missiles either earlier or later, depending on the work done after they analyze these terminal phases of the ballistic trajectories of Russian ballistic missiles.
Roman Igorovich, regarding what Zelensky said, that right now a Ukrainian delegation in America will be discussing the purchase of air defense systems, HIMARS and ATACMS. So do we need to modernize our air defense systems today or increase their quantity? Or increase the number of supplier countries so we can better protect our skies from the very situation that you just described?
Here's how information is sometimes presented from our Green Office. Well, in the end, at least aviation specialists or missile experts should be put there. We buy HIMARS and ATACMS, but these are different things. HIMARS is a launcher for ATACMS missiles. Well, it's a single system. You can't launch ATACMS with a slingshot. No, the green ones might try to launch them with a slingshot, no doubt about that. I don't know, maybe there are specialists there. And sure, you could theoretically launch them with a slingshot, but in reality, ATACMS are launched from HIMARS. HIMARS is a launcher for different types of missiles, including ATACMS, mainly the M39. We had two of those missiles, and now they're using the shorter range M30 and M31, which have a range of 86 kilometers. So all of this is actually one whole. But in order to stretch things out and make it look like there are a lot of different positions, they start separating them. Let me repeat once again, it's necessary. That's why, including in politics, there should also be people with basic military education. Then at least they won't be spreading incorrect information. That's one. Second, questions regarding the importance for us of certain air defense system strike assets. We can see this clearly. We don't have enough missiles. We might even have a sufficient number of air defense systems themselves, but we don't have enough missiles. And in order to have enough missiles, first of all, they need to be a bit cheaper, or better yet, not just a bit. And for that, we need to produce these missiles ourselves. Because if you have to go to America, it shouldn't be to buy something or bring something back from there. Yes, we need to launch joint production projects, just like Japan did, just like Spain did. The Spanish are already making the third missile. So we need to launch our own production, either parallel or joint, or buy a license and manufacture them ourselves, produce them ourselves. The state should produce them because this is strategic weaponry. For the state, for Ukraine, these are strategic tasks and they need to be approached exactly from this perspective. Not just go to the United States to buy a few hundred missiles. Well, as they say, it's already too late for that. This should have been done yesterday, the day before, a year ago, 2 years ago, as soon as we started getting air defense systems. We need to make our own, especially the simplest ones, especially against, say, those same drones, of which the Russians can now churn out hundreds. What we need are short-range surface-to-air missile systems with inexpensive missiles, not other means of destruction at this point, especially when the Russians are about to start mass-producing drones with jet engines. That means they'll be flying at altitudes above 5 kilometers and speeds over 500 kilometers per hour. You won't be able to hit them with anything but missiles. Well, maybe a fighter jet could shoot them down with its cannon, but otherwise only missiles will work. So we need cheap missiles and cheap launchers. And they can be produced. The British showed us, they gave us their Ravens. It's just a simple vehicle with 2 missiles mounted on it. You could even mount 4. The missile weighs, well, up to 100 kilograms, like the R-73. So that's the kind of level we're talking about. And you don't need to go anywhere to get this. It needs to be produced locally. that is produced here, not at Israeli bases or anywhere else, but at our own bases, at state enterprise facilities.
Roman Legoka, over the past few days, there have been reports that a column of white smoke rose over Roscosmos facilities in the Moscow region, along with some strange explosions. It was written that either this was sabotage, as you say, by concerned individuals, or there are serious problems with engine testing for Roscosmos. Moscow residents were in a panic. The center is engaged in testing rocket engines, propulsion systems, and spacecraft in a thermobaric chamber under simulated space conditions. All the Ukrainian military channels shared this, and the prevailing opinion was that either it was sabotage, where rocket engines were damaged and the tests failed, or secondly, it was simply negligence. What do you think it could be?
It would be nice if it was sabotage, especially related to the space program. Right now, my classmate is working at the General Staff of the Russian Federation. We learned to fly together at the Chernihiv Flight School, Lieutenant General Igor Marushin. He was a smart guy. I remember him both from our cadet years and later before the war. At the very least, we often met at the anniversaries of the CHVU graduation. So he had a solid career, not bad. He was a smart guy. Now he is in charge of space matters at the General Staff. He's the deputy. He's Gerasimov's deputy for space, and he's also the head of the Vimpel company, which deals specifically with these issues, the Almazante company. So it's all their structure. That's why if there's sabotage, Igor Makusha is involved. Well, in that case, he's a fine man. Good for him. He hasn't forgotten that it was Ukraine, Ukrainian soil that gave him his wings and that he learned to fly together with us. There is hope that among the generals, there are also those who care. Well, we'll see what the future holds. But in reality, of course, this is the work of most likely it's our circles doing, because creating problems for the Russian space industry, especially since it's so important to us, that's everything. The rocket industry, it's all about rockets. Roman
Nikolaevich, we constantly talk with you about strikes on the railway hubs of the Russian Federation, about the situation with gasoline. And just this past weekend, there were riots in Vladivostok, mini rallies, protests, quite serious ones. And this was directly related to the energy crisis. They ended up with a traffic collapse because Russian businesses can't deliver anything. And this was connected to gasoline prices. And these riots, a huge number of Russian war correspondents shared information about them. So protests like this have started. Well, of course, Vladivostok is not Moscow or St. Petersburg. Most likely it's very far away. But I would like you to comment on this.
Well, it's like you knew what I was about to start talking about. Of course, this is Far Eastern, Ukrainian. So who is starting these riots? Of course, it's our concerned Borodinkas, Kovalenkos, Dmitrenkos. It's clear, Russia is just a buffer between two Ukrainian republics. Even far away, there's the exact Ukrainian People's Republic and the Republic of Ukraine. This buffer should have been thrown away a long time ago. It's already served its time, so to speak. Yes, exactly. It's already served its term, because this direction, this is our Ukrainian land. Why? Because if we follow the logic of the Russians, then 100 years ago, it was precisely there that Ukrainians from Poltava, Chernihiv, and so on, tens of thousands of Ukrainians were resettled. They developed that land. So the Far East, including Vladivostok, is originally Ukrainian land, because there were not only uprisings there. The collapse of Russia might even start from there, and it could happen quickly. Then Skalkas.
Roman night not for the final. Anya Ku declared Israel's victory in the war. And everyone says that from Ukraine's perspective, this is very important. Why? Because now all the attention will be on Ukraine and weapons will go to Ukraine. In this way, Ukraine will be able to receive more weapons to fight the Russian aggressor, specifically from a military standpoint. From the perspective of the program, questions are on the website. Now that the war has ended for the moment, will this play into Ukraine's hands in terms of supplies?
Well, here's another great winner in the world, not Netanyahu. Putin was a winner, Trump was a winner, and now Netanyahu is also a winner. Well, whoever defeated whom, let them sort it out themselves on the spot. In reality, for example, a halt to hostilities in the Middle East is very beneficial for us. Or rather, it was disadvantageous for us, the start of military actions in the Middle East. All the little wars that Netanyahu has organized over the past 2 years have hit us very hard. Starting firstly from the general concept of exchanging part of Ukrainian territory for non-recognition of Palestine. Now, this case has already been discarded because most countries have recognized Palestine. Most importantly, it was recognized by the British Crown, and that's 15 countries, from Canada to New Zealand, including Australia. So this is quite a serious belt, a broad belt, which has already, you could say, 100% marked the recognition of the Palestinian state. So no one has marked it for Ukraine anymore. No matter who wanted it, Muscovites, Israelis, Americans, or people from Kiev, there's a big question as to who was more eager or quicker to push for this whole exchange. So this is a big plus for us, specifically regarding the recognition of Palestine. The second case is that the little wars that the IDF has recently organized in the Middle East, whether in Lebanon, Syria, or Iran, as we've all seen, have been driving up oil prices. So for us, this is very important because high oil prices gave Russians a large amount of petrodollars, which they could use to conduct military operations. That's what's happening right now, a halt in hostilities. For how long, we'll see. But a pause in the fighting now will lead to oil prices going down, and the Russian treasury won't be filled as much thanks to these military actions. That's why for us, this is a very significant positive development, which has only just begun. This needs to be clearly understood. For example, whether the Israelis released the hostages or not, they were supposed to release 2,000 Arabs, hostages who were sitting in their prisons. How many are still left? That's also a big question. Why is that? Because if they had 2,000 hostages ready to be released, there could be tens of thousands more Arabs there, languishing in Israeli prisons, and maybe the operation isn't over yet, so we'll see where all this leads. But the concept itself, the trend itself, is definitely positive. Plus, of course, the weaponry. Now it will be much easier to get weapons from our partners, especially the Americans, since the demand for weapons in the Middle East may decrease.
And the blackout in occupied Crimea. Because SBU Special Operations Forces struck with drones, the largest oil terminal in Feodosia, and a number of power plants. Specifically, we attacked the Simferopol substation, a series of explosions and a blackout, and the Kafa substation in Feodosia, which is part of Russia's energy bridge, according to all analysts. And they wrote that there was a blackout at night in the temporarily occupied Crimea. Moreover, in some areas, there still isn't any electricity. Roman Ilyich, well, it really is a celebration because the Feodosia marine oil terminal was hit again, as well as the Kafa substation and the substation Simferopol blackout. How do you assess the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine and the Special Operations Forces?
No one listens to us except for Malyuk, most likely. Because yes, the security service of Ukraine has specifically figured out where Russia's Achilles heel is. There are 3 of them for the Russians. It's like a 6-armed Semyonov with 2 heads, 2 chicken heads if you look at their coat of arms. So one is Moscow, but you have to get there. Only by leaflets, perhaps. The second is oil, and the security service is also working on the oil sector. And then there's Crimea. Crimea is the 3rd Achilles heel. Why? Because these are operational pockets closed off by 2 seas. Geographically, of course, it's an entry point, especially from the sea without drones. That's just called luck, especially after the JUAR and SBU guys drove away the Russian Black Sea fleet. So basically, you can come in from the sea, as they say, come in as much as you want. Well, that's about it. So the SBU, lately, both the GUR and the SBU have been active. In this case, it's the SBU working specifically on such major energy facilities in Crimea. Why target energy facilities in particular? Because it's part of the logistics chain. Supplies, especially fuel, for example, to the Kherson and Zaporizhia fronts, for instance. For us, it's very important to stop it right at the beginning. The Feodosia Bay, it's an ice-free bay and it's in use. There's a large oil terminal there handling transshipment of light petroleum products. That's where it goes. There are several large storage tanks for fuel there. Naturally, the Russians pump it in from the sea, and from there it spreads throughout Crimea and goes on to Kherson and Zaporizhia. And so Madya started it. At one point, there was a strike recently on the 6th, I believe. The strike was carried out specifically by unmanned systems. They marked this direction with a bit of smoke, so to speak, in a subtle way. Then the SBU finished the job, several at least barrels. Right now, these tanks are burning. They will burn for a long time, probably until they are completely burned out. And of course, the power substations. Why is it important for us to destroy the power bridges? The Russian ones, 2 substations that the SBU struck. They were mainly involved in transferring electricity. These are substations, not hydroelectric power plants, meaning not power plants, but substations that transferred electricity, mainly from the north to the east of Crimea or from the east to the north. That is trying to supply the railway, mainly the railway, with electricity. because for us it's important to stop the movement on the railway, especially over Jankoy. From Kerch to Jankoy, the railway runs, and the goal is to stop it. So one of the best options is to hit these substations. Malyuk is listening. Good job, guys. We'll show them even more where to.
Yeah, we're showing these shots right now, and it's really burning. But we've also received reports that right now, as we're streaming, Vardsky is under attack. There are a lot of drones and rockets, and explosions are still going on, according to our subscribers. What's happening there?
In Vardyska, the Russians are using it as a zone for storing and launching drones. There are a lot of drones. They're coming from the direction of Vardyska, especially towards Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia. So in general, launches are coming from there. We know perfectly well where everything is located there. Again, the security service is involved. They have a sufficient number of agents, informants, and concerned individuals, as we've discussed before. A lot of information comes in beforehand, and then the means of destruction are used. So maybe this particular strike was also carried out by the security service, including in Hvardiysk. Right now, a lot of special units are operating in Crimea. The main intelligence directorate, special operations forces, foreign intelligence service, Navy, these are all focused on the Crimean direction, and the Air Force is also doing a good job in this area. And special units, border troops, the security service, and also the CSOA, which operates with long-range strike capabilities. So Crimea should get ready, or rather, it's too late to get ready. It's time to start paddling. We've already told the Russians there how they can leave: freestyle, breaststroke, or doggy paddle, especially doggy paddle. That might actually be the best option. Maybe no one will drown that way.
Roman Nikolaevich. Recently, British media, very reputable ones, analytical outlets like the Financial Times and The Economist are reporting that various surprises may await the Russians. At the moment, the Ukrainian Armed Forces special operations to deoccupy Crimea are being discussed, including the possibility of an amphibious landing. You've always said that a landing isn't necessary, that just constant missile strikes, missile attacks would be enough. Let's discuss why such an information campaign is being carried out by the British media. The talk of an amphibious landing in Crimea, the deoccupation of the peninsula, and large-scale special operations.
Well, it's information pressure. In other words, an information psychological operation, IPSO, on the one hand. But again, for what purpose? So that they learn to swim, to walk. They can't swim, the Russians in Crimea. They'll have to weave and aim, most likely through the Kerch Strait breakthrough, since eventually we'll get to the Crimean bridge. But this is pressure. Why? Because right now there's no need to carry out special operations, amphibious landings, or even a ground operation at this moment. By no means. First of all, there aren't the forces or resources for that. The losses would be very high if, for example, they tried to landing our ground or naval forces on Crimean soil is definitely something we shouldn't do until aviation, missiles, and drones have at least worked over the area of the landing. You could say we've just started with Crimea. So in earnest, we've only been working since August, which basically means until the summer of next year. Crimea needs to be hit with long-range strike systems, artillery, drones, aviation, missiles, and BECs. They already have these BECs, mini aircraft carriers. We've talked about this many times. In other words, with long-range strike systems. Let me repeat once more. Crimea is a closed operational cauldron, geographically speaking. And it's very difficult to get out of there. Basically, there are only two ways in and out, through the northern approaches and the Kerch Bridge. The Kerch Bridge will be gone. In other words, they'll definitely reach it with ballistic missiles or some other means. One way or another, they'll get to it and take it out. After that, they'll have only one exit left, through the so-called northern gates. And we can reach them from the right bank of the Dnipro. That is, we can strike from the right bank of the Dnipro. It's about 100 kilometers there, 80 from Armyansk, and then further to the Spit. So there is a real possibility to completely block the exit from Crimea, which means the Russians will have a major problem with dispersing and moving their forces. We know where every bush is and which Russian is hiding under each bush. Naturally, it's just a matter of time before we cover everything and root them all out from there. That's why it's better to work this way for about a year. We will definitely drive the Russian military out of Crimea, and then, depending on the capabilities and resources we have, we'll see what comes next. After that, there will be ground operations, air operations. An assault can take many forms. It could be a naval assault, a ground assault, or an airborne assault. The possibilities are there. The only other direction we could move before Crimea is towards Skadovsk. And by the way, from Oleshki or Hola Pristan to Skadovsk is just 70 kilometers. So that's not a problem. And then it's just 50 kilometers by sea to Crimea. So such an operation would be staged in at least 2 phases. It would require air support, meaning it's a whole set of coordinated actions. And as for the help we're getting, our partners and journalists are helping to push the Russians out and make them nervous. So for that, a big
thank you. Here you go. Confirmation of your words. A total evacuation of more than 1,000 people, 10 with fuel, have been damaged. There's a huge fuel crisis at the Feodosia oil depot right now, and the occupiers are trying to evacuate from the peninsula. So there you go. Your words are immediately being proven true.
Well, here, it's really just a matter of physics even. Let me repeat it once again for the 3rd time already, just to make it clear. Crimea is a closed operational cauldron if you look at it from a military perspective. In other words, it's closed, it can be completely sealed off. The Kerch Bridge is taken out, brought under control, as are the northern exits. That's it, it's a cauldron, an operational cauldron. Naturally, the only way out would be to swim freestyle or doggy paddle. There's absolutely no other way. Russian aviation won't be able to get there either. If we already take to the air, naturally Russian ships won't be able to approach either, only by swimming. So let them practice. Well, we've been saying this for the 4th year in a row now, for the 4th year. They should at least learn to dog paddle.
In the comments to this video, write a few words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine, in support of our tandem. Together with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan, we discuss current military and political topics 3 times a week. Thank you. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and see you this Wednesday.
Goodbye.